The white walls of Metropolitan General Hospital's waiting room had become all too familiar to Jasmine Taylor. Every Wednesday afternoon, she would take time off from her busy schedule as a pharmaceutical sales representative to accompany her grandmother for her weekly checkups. Today was no different, except it was the day that would change her life forever. Jasmine sat in her usual spot, her dark curls neatly pulled back into a professional bun, scrolling through work emails on her phone. She wore her typical work attire, a navy blue blazer, matching skirt, and comfortable yet stylish heels. At 32 years old, she had everything society said she should want: a successful career, a nice car, and a beautiful apartment in the city. But something was missing. The waiting room was busy that day, filled with the usual mix of patients and their families. The sound of wheels caught her attention, and she looked up to see a young man in a wheelchair making his way through the entrance. He was struggling slightly with the heavy door, but his face showed determination rather than frustration. Without thinking twice, Jasmine got up to help him. "Let me get that for you," she said, holding the door open. The man looked up, and their eyes met. His warm brown eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled, showing a perfect set of white teeth that contrasted beautifully with his light brown skin. "Thank you," he said, his voice deep and friendly. "These doors can be tricky sometimes." He wheeled himself into the waiting room with practiced ease, parking his wheelchair near where Jasmine had been sitting. Jasmine returned to her seat, trying not to stare but finding herself drawn to this stranger. He wore simple clothes, jeans, a clean white t-shirt, and a worn but well-kept leather jacket. Despite being in a wheelchair, he carried himself with dignity and confidence. A few minutes passed before he spoke again. "I've seen you here before, haven't I? Every Wednesday?" Jasmine nodded, pleasantly surprised that he had noticed. "Yes, I come with my grandmother for her checkups. How about you?" "Physical therapy," he replied, gesturing to his legs. "I'm Marcus Wilson, former construction worker, current amateur web designer, and full-time optimist." His introduction, delivered with a gentle smile, immediately put Jasmine at ease. "I'm Jasmine Taylor," she responded, tucking her phone away. "Work could wait. Web design? That sounds interesting." For the next hour, they talked as if they'd known each other for years. Marcus told her about the workplace accident 2 years ago that had left him paralyzed from the waist down. Instead of letting it defeat him, he had taught himself web design during his recovery, determined to build a new life for himself. "It's not much yet," he admitted, "but I'm getting better at it. Started making websites for small local businesses. The pay isn't great, but it feels good to be working again." Jasmine found herself drawn to his positive attitude and the way he spoke about his dreams without any hint of self-pity. When he talked about his projects, his eyes lit up with enthusiasm and his hands moved animatedly as he explained his ideas. Their conversation only ended when a nurse called Marcus's name for his therapy session. As he prepared to leave, he hesitated for a moment. "I don't suppose. Would you like to get coffee sometime? The cafeteria here makes surprisingly good lattes." Jasmine smiled, ignoring the surprised looks from other patients in the waiting room. Some people might have seen an unlikely pair, a successful businesswoman and a disabled man living on modest means. But Jasmine saw something different. She saw strength, determination, and a genuine soul. "I'd love to," she replied. "Same time next week?" Marcus's face broke into a bright smile. "It's a date." As she watched him wheel away, Jasmine felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time: excitement about getting to know someone new. She didn't know it then, but this simple encounter in a hospital waiting room was the beginning of a love story that would challenge perceptions, overcome obstacles, and prove that true connection knows no boundaries. That evening, as Jasmine drove home through the city streets, she couldn't stop thinking about Marcus's smile and the way he spoke about his dreams. For the first time in years, her usual Wednesday hospital visit had turned into something she would look forward to all week long. Over the next 3 months, the hospital cafeteria became Jasmine and Marcus's special meeting place. Every Wednesday, after his therapy and her grandmother's checkup, they would share coffee and stories. Marcus always insisted on paying for his own drink, even though Jasmine offered to treat him many times. Their coffee dates soon turned into dinner dates, with Marcus choosing small, affordable restaurants where his wheelchair could easily move around. He took pride in paying for their meals, carefully budgeting his disability checks and the money he made from his growing web design business. One evening, while they were eating at a local diner, Jasmine's best friend Lisa happened to walk in. Lisa's eyes widened at the sight of Jasmine sitting across from a man in a wheelchair, laughing at his jokes and looking happier than she had in years. The next day, Lisa couldn't hold back her concerns. "Jasmine, what are you doing?" she asked during their lunch break at work. "You could have any man you want. Why are you settling for someone who can't even walk?" Jasmine put down her fork, her face serious. "Marcus is not someone I'm settling for," she said firmly. "He makes me laugh, he's smart, and he works harder than anyone I know. His wheelchair doesn't define who he is." But Lisa wasn't the only one with doubts. Word spread quickly through Jasmine's social circle. Her coworkers whispered behind her back, and her social media filled with concerned messages from friends. "Are you sure about this?" they asked. "Think about your future." The biggest challenge came when Jasmine decided to tell her parents about Marcus. She invited them to dinner at her apartment one Sunday evening. Her mother, Dr. Patricia Taylor, was a retired college professor who had always pushed Jasmine to aim high in life. Her father, James Taylor, was a successful business executive who had big dreams for his only daughter. "I've met someone special," Jasmine announced over dinner. "His name is Marcus, and he's wonderful." She took a deep breath before adding, "He's also paralyzed from the waist down." The silence that followed was deafening. Her mother's fork clattered against her plate, and her father's face turned serious. "Honey," her mother began carefully, "are you sure this is what you want? Being with someone disabled, it's a big responsibility." "What does he do for a living?" her father asked, his business mind going straight to practical matters. "He's building his own web design business," Jasmine explained proudly. "He taught himself everything from scratch after his accident." Her father frowned. "Web design? Jasmine, you're a successful professional. You need someone who can match your lifestyle, your ambitions." But Jasmine stood her ground. "Dad, Marcus has more ambition than anyone I know. He doesn't let his disability stop him from chasing his dreams. And he makes me happy. Isn't that what matters?" Despite her parents' concerns, Jasmine and Marcus's relationship continued to grow stronger. Marcus showed her how to see life differently. He taught her to appreciate small victories, like when he managed to cook dinner for her in his adapted kitchen, or when he landed a new client for his business. Jasmine, in turn, never made Marcus feel less capable. She learned when to help and when to step back, respecting his independence. When he struggled with tasks, she waited patiently, only offering assistance if he asked for it. Their love grew in quiet moments, watching movies on Marcus's worn couch, helping him organize his small home office, or simply talking for hours about their dreams. Marcus shared his hopes of expanding his web design business, while Jasmine talked about maybe starting her own pharmaceutical consulting company someday. One evening, as they sat in Marcus's small apartment watching the sunset through his window, Jasmine realized something important. All the people questioning their relationship were focused on what Marcus couldn't do. But she saw what he could do: make her laugh until her sides hurt, challenge her to think differently, and love her with a dedication that amazed her every day. "What are you thinking about?" Marcus asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Jasmine smiled, taking his hand. "Just about how lucky I am to have met you that day in the hospital." Marcus squeezed her hand, his eyes shining with love and gratitude. In that simple moment, both of them knew that what they had was worth fighting for, no matter what anyone else thought. While Jasmine's family struggled to accept her relationship with Marcus, his family was completely different. The first time Jasmine visited Marcus's family home, she was nervous. She didn't know what to expect, but what she found was pure warmth and love. Marcus's mother, Sarah Wilson, was a retired nurse who had raised 3 children on her own after losing her husband to cancer 15 years ago. She lived in a small but cozy house in the suburbs, where flowers bloomed in the front yard and the smell of fresh baking often filled the air. "Welcome, welcome," Sarah exclaimed, pulling Jasmine into a tight hug the moment she entered. "Marcus has told us so much about you." The house was filled with family photos, including many of Marcus before his accident, showing him in his construction worker's gear, smiling proudly. Marcus's younger sister, Maria, was there too, with her 2 small children who immediately took to Jasmine. The kids didn't even seem to notice their uncle's wheelchair, climbing onto his lap for hugs and stories as if it was the most natural thing in the world. During dinner, Sarah told stories about Marcus's childhood, making everyone laugh. He was always the determined one, she said, serving Jasmine an extra helping of homemade macaroni and cheese. When he was 10, he spent an entire summer learning to ride a bike without training wheels. Fell down probably 100 times, but he never gave up. Mom, Marcus groaned, but he was smiling. You don't need to tell every embarrassing story. Oh, hush, Sarah said, patting his hand. I'm just helping Jasmine understand what she's getting into with this stubborn son of mine. The evening was filled with laughter, good food, and genuine conversation. There were no awkward questions about Jasmine's intentions, no concerned looks, just pure acceptance and love. However, things were very different at Jasmine's parents' country club the following weekend. Her father had insisted on introducing Marcus to his business associates, perhaps hoping they would talk some sense into his daughter. As they entered the fancy club, Jasmine could feel people staring. Marcus handled it with grace, navigating his wheelchair through the crowded dining room with dignity. But Jasmine saw the whispers, the pointed looks, and the way some people suddenly found excuses to be elsewhere. Her father's friend, Richard, a bank executive, pulled Jasmine aside during the lunch. Your father tells me you're quite successful in pharmaceutical sales, he said. You know, my son David is a doctor. He's about your age, and I'd be happy to arrange a dinner. Thank you. Jasmine cut him off politely but firmly, but I'm very happy with Marcus. Meanwhile, Marcus was having a surprisingly good conversation with an elderly businessman named Mr. Thompson. The old man had noticed Marcus's laptop and asked about his web design work. Soon, they were deep in discussion about the importance of digital marketing for traditional businesses. Young man, Mr. Thompson said loudly enough for everyone to hear, I've been looking for someone to redesign my company's website. Would you be interested in taking on the project? Jasmine's father nearly choked on his drink. He hadn't expected Marcus to make a business connection at the club. That evening, as Marcus and Jasmine drove home, he was quiet. Your world is very different from mine, he finally said. Jasmine reached over and squeezed his hand. Maybe that's true, but my world needs more people like you in it. Did you see how Mr. Thompson didn't care about your wheelchair? He just saw your talent. Your father didn't look too happy about it, Marcus said with a small smile. Dad needs time, Jasmine replied. But he'll come around. Just like you won over Mr. Thompson, you'll win over others too. Besides, I don't care what anyone thinks. I love you for who you are. Marcus turned to look at her, his eyes filled with emotion. In that moment, both of them knew that no matter what challenges they faced, whether from Jasmine's social circle or the wider world, they would face them together. Later that night, Sarah called Jasmine. Thank you, she said simply. For what? Jasmine asked, surprised. For seeing my son the way I see him, not as someone in a wheelchair, but as the amazing man he is. Jasmine felt tears in her eyes as she replied, I'm the lucky one, Sarah. I really am. Marcus had been acting strange all week. Jasmine noticed how he kept checking his phone, making secret calls, and changing the subject whenever she asked about his plans for the weekend. It wasn't like him to be so mysterious. On Friday evening, Marcus called Jasmine and asked her to come to his apartment. I need your help with a new website I'm designing, he said. His voice sounded nervous, which was unusual because Marcus was always confident about his work. When Jasmine arrived at his small apartment, she found the hallway lined with fairy lights. Her heart started beating faster as she followed the twinkling path to his door. She knocked, and Marcus called out, It's open. Inside, the apartment was transformed. More fairy lights hung from the ceiling, creating a magical glow. Marcus had cleared the living room furniture to make a path for his wheelchair. On his computer desk sat a beautiful bouquet of red roses. Marcus? Jasmine called out, looking around the decorated space. Come here, Marcus said softly from his home office. When Jasmine walked in, she found him in front of his computer, wearing a nice blue button-down shirt she had never seen before. I do have a website to show you, he said with a shy smile. I've been working on it for the past month. He turned his computer screen toward her. The website began to play like a movie. On the screen, pictures of their time together started appearing one by one. There were photos from their first coffee date in the hospital cafeteria, their dinner dates, family gatherings, and silly selfies they had taken together. Each photo was accompanied by Marcus's words, describing what that moment meant to him. Under their first coffee date photo, he had written, "The day an angel helped me with a door and changed my life forever." Tears filled Jasmine's eyes as she watched their love story unfold on the screen. The final image was a recent photo of them at Marcus's mother's house, both laughing as his little niece sat on his lap. Under this photo, words began to appear. "Jasmine Taylor, you saw past my wheelchair and into my heart." Marcus cleared his throat and Jasmine turned to look at him. In his hands, he held a small velvet box. It wasn't a fancy jewelry store box, but a simple one he had obviously picked out himself. "I know I'm not the kind of man your parents wanted for you," Marcus began, his voice shaking slightly. "I can't give you big houses or expensive cars. I can't take you dancing or carry you across thresholds." He paused, taking a deep breath. "But I can give you my whole heart. I can promise to love you every day of my life, to support your dreams, to make you laugh, and to be the best partner I can be." Marcus opened the box, revealing a simple but beautiful sterling silver ring with a small diamond. "I saved up for 6 months to buy this ring. It's not as fancy as what you deserve, but—" "It's perfect," Jasmine whispered, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Jasmine Taylor," Marcus said, his own eyes wet with tears, "will you marry me?" For a moment, Jasmine couldn't speak. She thought about all the people who had doubted them, all the obstacles they had faced. She thought about how Marcus had proved them all wrong with his determination, his kindness, and his unwavering love for her. "Yes," she finally managed to say. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Marcus's hands were shaking as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, just like they fit perfectly together. Jasmine knelt down beside his wheelchair and kissed him, not caring that her tears were making his shirt wet. When they finally pulled apart, Marcus was beaming. "I have one more surprise," he said, turning back to his computer. He pressed a button, and their song, the one that had been playing during their first dinner date, started playing softly through the speakers. "I may not be able to dance with you," Marcus said, "but we can still share this moment." Jasmine sat on his lap, wrapped her arms around his neck, and they swayed together in his wheelchair, creating their own kind of dance. In that moment, nothing else mattered, not his disability, not her family's expectations, not the challenges ahead. They had each other, and that was enough. Planning a wedding turned out to be more challenging than Jasmine and Marcus had expected. Every time they visited a wedding venue, the first question wasn't about dates or prices, but about wheelchair accessibility. Many beautiful places they looked at had stairs everywhere, narrow doorways, or no ramps. "We could pay for them to install temporary ramps," Jasmine suggested one day after another disappointing venue visit. They were sitting in Marcus's living room, surrounded by wedding magazines and budget spreadsheets. Marcus shook his head firmly. "No, honey. We need to find a place that's already accessible. I don't want our wedding day to be about my wheelchair." The budget was another big concern. Marcus insisted on paying half of all wedding expenses, even though his web design business was just starting to grow. He had landed Mr. Thompson's website project and a few others, but his income was still modest. "What about the community center where you do your physical therapy?" Marcus suggested one evening. "It's fully accessible, has a nice garden for photos, and the rental fee is reasonable." Jasmine thought about the simple building with its plain walls and fluorescent lighting. It wasn't the fancy wedding venue she had once dreamed about, but seeing how important this was to Marcus, she smiled. "Let's go look at it tomorrow." The community center's events coordinator, Mrs. Chen, was excited to help them. She showed them the main hall, which was indeed wheelchair-friendly with its wide doorways and smooth floors. "We can move these tables anywhere you like," Mrs. Chen explained. "And look, we have this nice stage area where you can say your vows. We can put a ramp there for easy access." As they explored the space, Jasmine's creative mind started working. "We could hang fairy lights from the ceiling," she said, "just like you did for the proposal, and maybe put up some flowing curtains to cover the walls." Marcus watched her with love in his eyes. He knew she was used to much fancier places, but here she was, planning ways to make a simple community center beautiful, all because she loved him. They set a date for 3 months later, choosing a Saturday in spring when the garden would be in full bloom. The guest list was small, just close family and friends. Many of Jasmine's wealthy acquaintances had drifted away since her engagement to Marcus, but she found she didn't miss them. What they didn't know was that their families had been meeting in secret. Sarah Wilson had reached out to Jasmine's mother, Patricia, suggesting they work together to give the couple a special surprise. At first, Patricia had been hesitant, still struggling with her daughter's choice. But as she spent time with Sarah, learning about Marcus's strength and determination, her heart began to soften. One day, while Marcus and Jasmine were meeting with Mrs. Chen about chair arrangements, their mothers met at a coffee shop with Mr. Thompson, who had become quite fond of Marcus. "The boy has talent," Mr. Thompson said. "His website doubled my company's online sales in just 2 months. I've recommended him to several business associates." "But he still insists on this simple wedding," Sarah sighed. "He won't let Jasmine spend more money, even though she could." Patricia was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee. Finally, she spoke. "Maybe we could help. James and I. We had set aside money for Jasmine's wedding years ago. We just never imagined that she'd marry someone like my son," Sarah asked gently. Patricia looked ashamed. "I was wrong," she admitted. "I see now what Jasmine sees in him. He makes her happier than I've ever seen her." Mr. Thompson smiled. "Then perhaps it's time to show them both how much their families support them. I have some connections in the event planning business." And so, while Marcus and Jasmine planned their simple wedding, their families were secretly preparing to give them something extraordinary. The couple had no idea that their modest celebration was about to become something magical. The morning of the wedding arrived with golden sunshine streaming through the windows of Marcus's apartment. He had insisted on following the tradition of not seeing the bride before the ceremony, so Jasmine had spent the night at her parents' house. Marcus sat in his wheelchair, looking at his reflection in the bathroom mirror as he tried to fix his tie for the 3rd time. His hands were shaking slightly, not from nervousness about marrying Jasmine, but from worry that he wasn't giving her the wedding she deserved. His sister Maria walked in, already dressed in her burgundy bridesmaid dress. "Here, let me help you with that," she said, taking over the tie-fixing duties. "You look very handsome, big brother." "Do you think this is good enough?" Marcus asked quietly, gesturing to his new suit. He had spent a significant portion of his savings on it, wanting to look his best for Jasmine. The suit had been specially tailored to look good while he was seated in his wheelchair. "Marcus Wilson," Maria said firmly, "that woman loves you more than anything in this world. You could wear a trash bag and she'd still look at you like you hummed the moon." Meanwhile, across town at the Taylor residence, Jasmine sat at her old bedroom vanity while her mother helped her with her hair. She had chosen a simple but elegant white dress that flowed beautifully whether she was standing or sitting on Marcus's lap. "Something doesn't feel right," Patricia said suddenly, stepping back from Jasmine's hair. Jasmine's heart sank. Was her mother having second thoughts about the wedding? But then Patricia smiled and opened a small box she had brought with her. "This was your grandmother's," she said, pulling out a delicate pearl hairpin. "She wore it at her wedding, and I wore it at mine. Now it's your turn." Tears welled up in Jasmine's eyes as her mother carefully placed the pin in her hair. It was the first time Patricia had treated this wedding like any other family wedding, not just her daughter's questionable choice. Back at Marcus's apartment, an unexpected visitor arrived. James Taylor, Jasmine's father, knocked on the door, looking somewhat uncomfortable in his expensive suit. "Sir," Marcus said in surprise, wheeling back to let him in. "Is everything okay? Is Jasmine all right?" "Everything's fine," James said, taking a seat on Marcus's couch. He looked around the small apartment, noting the desk where Marcus worked on his web designs, the neat organization that made the space wheelchair accessible, and the photos of Jasmine that covered one wall. "I owe you an apology," James said finally. "When Jasmine first told us about you, I only saw the wheelchair. I didn't see the man who makes my daughter happier than I've ever seen her." Marcus was speechless as James continued. "I've been watching how you insist on paying your own way, how you're building your business from scratch. That takes real character. I was wrong about you, son." James reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you and Jasmine. A wedding gift." Before Marcus could protest, James held up his hand. "Just open it." Inside the envelope was a business card for James's company's CEO, and a letter offering Marcus a contract to redesign all of their corporate websites. "Mr. Thompson showed me your work," James explained. "We need someone with your talent. This isn't charity, it's business. You've earned it." Marcus stared at the letter, his vision blurring with tears. This contract would change everything for his business. "Thank you, sir," he managed to say. "No more, sir," James replied, standing up. "Call me James, or Dad if you'd like." He checked his watch. "Now we should get going. Don't want to keep my daughter waiting." As they left the apartment, Marcus felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had worried so much about not being able to give Jasmine the life she was used to. Now, with this opportunity, he could build something real for their future. What Marcus didn't know was that this was just the first of many surprises waiting for them on their wedding day. When Marcus arrived at the community center, he couldn't believe his eyes. The plain building he and Jasmine had chosen for their modest wedding was completely transformed. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, replacing the simple fairy lights they had planned. Elegant white drapes covered the walls, and beautiful flower arrangements filled every corner. "What? How?" Marcus stammered, looking around in amazement from his wheelchair. His mother appeared beside him, beaming with pride. "Surprise, sweetheart. All the families came together to do this for you and Jasmine." The once simple hall now looked like a scene from a fairy tale. The floor was covered with a plush white carpet that was perfectly smooth for his wheelchair. The plain metal chairs had been replaced with elegant covered ones, each decorated with burgundy ribbons and fresh flowers. But the biggest surprise was yet to come. Marcus's physical therapist, Dr. Rodriguez, approached him with a smile. "Ready for the second surprise?" she asked. Marcus looked confused until he saw two of his therapy teammates wheeling in something he recognized: a specialized standing frame, decorated to match the wedding decor. For the past 3 months, he had been secretly working with his therapy team, building up his strength to stand for just a few minutes. "You'll be able to stand for your first kiss as husband and wife," Dr. Rodriguez explained, her eyes twinkling. "We practiced this, Marcus. You can do it." Tears filled Marcus's eyes. He had wanted so badly to stand with Jasmine for at least one moment on their wedding day, but he hadn't dared to hope it would be possible. Meanwhile, in the bridal room, Jasmine was also discovering surprises. Instead of the simple makeup she had planned to do herself, a professional makeup artist and hairdresser were waiting. Her mother's best friend, who owned a luxury spa, had arranged for a complete bridal beauty treatment. "But we didn't budget for this," Jasmine protested weakly, even as she was guided to a chair. "Consider it a gift from everyone who loves you," her mother said, squeezing her hand. "Both families wanted to give you the wedding you deserve." As the makeup artist worked, Jasmine could hear excited voices and movement outside. Her father peeked in, his eyes growing wet when he saw her. "Princess, you look beautiful," he said. "And wait until you see what's out there." Finally, it was time. The wedding music began, not from the portable speaker they had planned to use, but from a string quartet hidden behind a flower-covered screen. Jasmine's father took her arm, and the doors opened. Jasmine gasped. The community center was unrecognizable. White roses and lilies created an enchanted garden effect. Tiny lights twinkled everywhere, making the room glow like starlight. The guests were seated in perfect rows, all smiling with tears in their eyes. And there at the end of the aisle was Marcus, looking handsome in his suit. But something was different. Next to his wheelchair stood the standing frame, and his therapy team was discreetly positioned nearby. As Jasmine walked down the aisle on her father's arm, she saw Marcus's eyes fill with tears. She knew that look. It was the same one he had given her the day they first met, full of love and wonder. When she reached him, Marcus smiled and whispered, "Ready for a surprise?" Before Jasmine could ask what he meant, his therapy team moved into position. With practiced movements, they helped Marcus transfer to the standing frame. Slowly, carefully, Marcus rose to his feet. Gasps of joy and surprise filled the room. Jasmine's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. There stood Marcus, supported by the frame but standing tall, looking directly into her eyes. "I wanted to stand beside you, just for this moment," he said softly. The minister smiled and began the ceremony, but few guests were paying attention to his words. All eyes were on the couple, the beautiful bride and her brave groom, standing together against all odds, proving that love knows no boundaries. The wedding reception was filled with joy, laughter, and more surprises. After Marcus and Jasmine shared their first kiss as husband and wife, with Marcus standing proudly in his support frame, they discovered that their families had thought of everything to make their celebration perfect. Instead of the simple buffet they had planned, there was a beautiful dinner service. Each table was decorated with stunning centerpieces, and a professional photographer captured every precious moment. The couple's first dance had been carefully planned too. Marcus's physical therapy team helped him into a special wheelchair that could spin and move smoothly, allowing him and Jasmine to share a beautiful dance together. "May I have everyone's attention?" James Taylor stood up, tapping his glass gently. The room fell silent as Jasmine's father began his speech. "When my daughter first told me about Marcus, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I judged him before I knew him." He paused, looking at the happy couple. "But Marcus taught me something important. He showed me that true strength isn't about physical ability. It's about the size of your heart and the power of your determination." Sarah Wilson, Marcus's mother, wiped tears from her eyes as James continued. "Today, I'm not just gaining a son-in-law, I'm gaining a business partner." He turned to address the other guests. "I'm proud to announce that Marcus's web design company will be handling all of our corporate accounts. And that's not charity, that's because he's the best person for the job." The room erupted in applause. Marcus squeezed Jasmine's hand, overwhelmed by how much had changed since that first day in the hospital waiting room. Mr. Thompson stood up next. "Speaking of business," he said with a smile, "I have my own announcement. Several of us business owners have been impressed by Marcus's work. We decided to invest in his company. Marcus, we want to help you expand your business and hire more people like yourself, talented individuals who just need a chance to prove themselves." Marcus couldn't hold back his tears. His dream of building a successful business that could provide opportunities for other disabled people was coming true. But the surprises weren't over. Patricia Taylor stepped forward, holding an envelope. "Jasmine, Marcus, your father and I have one more gift." She handed the envelope to the couple. Inside was a key and a photo of a beautiful modern house. "It's fully accessible," Patricia explained. "We've had it modified with everything you need. Wide doorways, smooth floors, adapted kitchen, everything. It's your new home, if you want it." Jasmine looked at Marcus, worried he might feel uncomfortable accepting such a big gift. But Marcus smiled and addressed the room. "Thank you all so much, but the greatest gift isn't the business opportunities or even the house. It's seeing how love can change hearts and bring people together." Later that evening, as the celebration continued around them, Marcus and Jasmine took a quiet moment alone in the garden. The spring air was warm, and fairy lights twinkled in the trees above them. "Did you ever imagine our wedding would turn out like this?" Jasmine asked, sitting on Marcus's lap in his wheelchair. Marcus shook his head. "Never. But then again, I never imagined someone like you would help me with a door one day and change my whole life." "Our life is just beginning," Jasmine said, kissing him softly. "And it's going to be beautiful." As they sat there together, they could hear their families and friends laughing and celebrating inside. Their two worlds had finally become one. Marcus's disability, which some had seen as a barrier, had actually become a bridge that brought people together and opened hearts. Their wedding day had turned out to be more than just a celebration of their love. It was proof that when people open their hearts and look past their prejudices, amazing things can happen. Marcus and Jasmine's story became an inspiration in their community, showing that true love knows no boundaries, and that sometimes the biggest surprises in life come in unexpected packages. As the stars began to appear in the evening sky, Marcus and Jasmine held each other close, knowing that their love story was just beginning. Their wedding day had been full of surprises, but the greatest surprise of all was how their love had transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of everyone around them.